Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new series on the Gamers Plus channel. My name is Alexander Kazina. Hello, everybody, and this is Eilert.
Hey, I'm Ailert. I'm joining Alexander today, and we're gonna learn some things about the Command and Conquer franchise.
Indeed, we are. A bit of a quick update at the start of this. I know that some of you have been waiting to listen to some of our new commentaries that we previously promised on this channel. Those are still going to be coming in the future. We got a bit sidetracked by some basically other obligations, but we will be producing more of those later on. For now, however, we wanted to, keep the channel populated with new, interesting content, and we figured we'd do something that we've been meaning to do for quite some time, which is basically sit down and interview each other on franchises and games that one person is very familiar with, but that the other person is not so familiar with. And today we're going to be talking about the Command and Conquer series, which is a series that I, as a result of writing for the channel for a couple of years now, have come to be kind of decently familiar with, but I can't claim to be as familiar or as knowledgeable about it as you, Eilert.
Well, we're about to find out. I mean, I love the franchise. It's I think one of the actual first ever games that I've ever played myself. So I go way back with it, and I hope I can learn
don't
a thing
go
or two about it.
Don't go too into detail because I'm gonna I have some questions to ask you about that.
For sure.
Yeah. So the way that this is going to work is to kind of keep things structured and orderly. We decided ahead of time that we're going to be asking each other questions and that we're specifically only going to limit ourselves to 10, very specific questions. Obviously, as our conversation grows and evolves, we might pepper in like a little side, question here or there, but we want to just kind of keep it to 10 questions. So, without further ado, let me start off by asking, what is Command and Conquer?
It is a real-time strategy game. So it's not turn-based. You don't have to wait your turns or anything. It's all happening, in real time. And it's basically you command armies, you command vehicles, units, you build structures. And with these structures and units, you try to take over and defeat the other player, AI. Command and Conquer is a strategy game in its root, and that's really it. Yeah.
All right, cool. And the second question is, how did you become familiar with the series? You hinted at this a little bit more, and kind of older fans of us will know that a little while ago we appeared on the Zone Bros podcast, where I feel like you talked a little bit about your experience with the history there. But let's kind of hear it again. How did you become familiar with this real-time strategy series?
Yeah, so the first time, or when I moved to the Netherlands, this was around 1999. I came from America, actually. I got acquainted with some new people around my neighborhood, which eventually turned into like a lifelong friend thereafter. And one of the first games that we played on his old Windows 98 computer was Command and Conquer Red Alert. And I remember being so enamored with like the whole top-down isometric design strategy. I thought it was so cool, to the point where I actually, when I was not playing the game, I was making these little drawings of like how I would design bases for when I was playing the game again, because we were childs and we didn't have unlimited access to the computer. So
Right.
this was all like very early. I think I'm talking about 2000, 2001 right now. So yeah, this was actually one of the first games that I played back then. Yeah.
That's a lot like people drawing their own like dungeons in Zelda, like back when the series was entirely top down, or like drawing their own levels in Mario, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And I think those games, like the more simple in design games, kind of allow for that, whereas games currently these days don't really have that same kind of magic.
Cool. Now, the thing about the Command and Conquer series that, as an outsider back when I first joined Gamers, I wasn't really aware of, but that I kind of gradually became more and more understanding of the more and more I researched the series, is that there are basically three different, maybe even more than that, questionably branches in the Command and Conquer series. So, could you kind of like go into detail into what these sort of different branches are? And like, what do you think? What's your kind of personal favorite of them?
Yeah, so you have the Tiberian universe, which is all about the GDI and the Nod. Um, so this is basically your generic allied faction versus a very, actually I think very cool, not terrorists, but they're sort of the bad guys, or at least it's hinted at. And you also have the aliens later on in Command and Conquer 3. You also have the Red Alert universe, which is about the Allies versus the Soviets. And there's some cool time manipulation, history altering stuff going on there, which is really cool to find out for yourself if you ever get into the series. And then there's also the Generals universe, which is about USA versus China versus the Global Liberation Army, the GLA. Of all these three universes, I would have to say, even though most people think it's kind of the most generic of the three, I still think that the Generals universe really has a certain charm to it. And I cannot really put my finger on what that charm really is. But I just enjoy the factions. I really enjoy the vehicles, the units. It's all a bit more grounded. But even then, it has a lot of personality, that universe. So I'd have to go with Generals.
When I was, researching the video for whatever happened to Command and Conquer Generals 2, the kind of canceled game that at one point morphed into a multiplayer-centric free-to-play game and all that, it kind of struck me that the Generals branch of the Command and Conquer series is kind of like the fan favorite branch, where it's not as beloved or as storied as the other two branches, in part because it's a little bit it was created a little bit later on, but there are a lot of kind of diehard fans that really kind of love it. Would you say that that's like an accurate description of the Generals branch?
Yeah, I do think so. That it may come down to the fact that Generals was released at a really interesting point in time. A lot of the subject matter within the first Generals was really contemporary to what was going on in real life. The Iraq and Afghanistan wars back then. So I think that game really came out at an interesting point in time, and because of that, it became really popular as well. In addition to being the first 3D Command and Conquer, back then Command and Conquer was only 2D, and I don't really think that Westward or EA Los Angeles really struck gold again with the Command and Conquer franchise as much as they did with like Generals. So I think that for a lot of people, Generals was kind of their first and best introduction to the series, and after that, there weren't really a lot of opportunities to get into the franchise, as well as with Generals.
At the same time, though, like Generals, from what you described and what I gleaned from my research into it, is definitely substantially more serious, much less comical than some of the other branches. And I can understand how some players really like the kind of loony zaniness of Tim Curry and all that other eccentricity of the other two branches.
Yeah, for sure. Even though, like if you click on the units or if you order them around, like Generals have some really fun voice lines there. So I'd say the kind of zany wackiness is still retained in just the general gameplay, not so much the cutscenes or what have you. It's more the underlying gameplay that gives it that humorous edge.
Right. So moving on from talking about each of the individual branches, on the whole, what was the kind of Command and Conquer series overall effect on the sort of real-time strategy genre kind of over the years? Like, how is it that it, basically affected it, made it grow, evolve? What were the biggest ways in which it changed, its fellow competitors?
Ooh, I'm not sure if I'm equipped to answer this question, but
We don't need to go like super, in depth.
No,
It
for
can just
sure.
be like, yeah.
Well, the one thing I do remember from making the Command and Conquer Rise and Fall video is that back in the 2D era, when Command and Conquer was still 2D, it had a competition going on with Warcraft and Starcraft. Blizzard was releasing its own brand of real-time strategy games, and for each strategy game that Blizzard launched, Westwood had a RTS game to launch in competition with that. So I think the way they kind of one-upped each other has led to StarCraft being one of the most influential strategy games in a long time, and Warcraft kind of evolving to the way it is now, to the brand it is right now, and you also have that ripple effect from people playing Warcraft 3 and modding that game into a MOBA, which effectively spawned the MOBA genre as a whole. So I think that Command and Conquer's influence on the not just the RTS scene, but like the gaming scene as a whole, is very much overlooked. It was like it laid the groundwork for what the RTS formula was in its heyday, and then a lot of experience evolved from that, not just new RTS games.
There's a turn of phrase which is the rising tide raises all ships or raises all boats, and it strikes me that that's very applicable to this series.
Yeah, for sure. I'd say that yeah, again, the effect Command and Conquer has had on the gaming industry is often overlooked, and yeah, I hope our videos kind of, or at least the Rise and Fall videos, kind of lay out what it meant for the gaming industry. But yeah, I do agree with that statement very much.
Yeah. Now, obviously this series elevated the kind of stature and, popularity and made other series around it grow. But what do you think specifically made Command and Conquer appealing to players in ways that maybe Blizzard's RTSs or Age of Empires and its kind of derivatives weren't? Like, what is it about the series that made people go, oh, this porridge is just right. Those porridges are too hot or too cold.
I'd say that Command and Conquer was always, in a way, sort of relatable. Even with the Red Alert universe, it was all built on the Red Scare that was really still kind of having its rippling effects in the 90s, and with like the first Command and Conquer, it was all very much based on the Desert Storm era of warfare, and like I said with Generals, it was also very contemporary for the effects or the wars that were going on back then. So I'd say that Command and Conquer as a whole has always had a lower barrier to entry because it was always a more relatable game than the fantastical conceits of the likes of Warcraft or Starcraft, and I think that a lot of players kind of enjoyed that aspect.
Cool. So, the Command and Conquer series, got its start in the mid '90s. Continued throughout the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And then, as we discuss in our Rise and Fall of the Command and Conquer series video, it kind of came screeching to a halt with kind of Command and Conquer 4, Tiberium Twilight. In your original video, you really kind of stress how much that game really kind of did a number on the series and effectively kind of resulted in it hibernating / going away for quite some time. But I want to kind of like play devil's advocate for a second here. If Tiberian Twilight hadn't been, the failure that it was, if it was a perfectly serviceable, or if not that, even a great game, like, do you think that the series still had much longer to go after that point? Or do you think that the series kind of would have kind of collapsed or gone away anyways.
Yeah, it's difficult to tell. I personally don't think that Command and Conquer 4 was really the final nail in the coffin for the franchise as it was, because even if it hadn't been released at all, I think that the RTS genre was kind of coming to an end when the seventh generation of consoles was really gaining traction. So I don't really put all the blame on Command and Conquer 4. While I do think it's regrettable that it was launched in that state, I don't think it really was that, the final coffin for Command and Conquer. No.
Would you say it was more a product of just sort of the increasing rise in popularity of consoles and developers becoming more and more incensed on trying to develop games that are specifically built with consoles, limitations and affordances in mind, and a series like Command and Conquer, which is a real-time strategy series, not really kind of working well on those platforms?
Yeah, you were already seeing that in the seventh gen, that PC as a platform was just not really viable for a lot of publishers, including EA, and I think that was just their way of kind of putting the franchise to rest. And I don't know, I'm not sure what they're doing right now with the remaster, what their intent is. Maybe the franchise or the PC's rising again, but who knows.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, on the subject of that, like, how do you feel about the kind of series, the outlook on the series' future at the moment? You mentioned the current remake, which is coming along the way, although it's unknown when exactly it is coming or what it will look like. Do you think that the series has a chance of making a comeback? I know it's kind of like, especially to older RTS fans that have been with it since the heydays, it can seem kind of bleak right now, but we have had examples this console generation of games like Divinity Original Sin 2, for example, which kind of revived that old school brand of Western RPGs and have, in turn led to games like, for example, Baldur's Gate 3 getting off the ground. Do you think that potentially something similar could happen with Command and Conquer?
Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. Again, I could see it happen from any other publisher than EA. The fact is that for EA, this is just a really odd move and something that's so out of their usual line of making games. So I'm not sure what their rationale is behind remaking or remastering Command and Conquer the way they're doing right now. Obviously, it's not going to be as big of a hit like their FIFA or the Battlefield franchises. So I'm really kind of curious to see where this is going and if there's a lot more coming. The future is very, very much unpredictable for me right now as a Command and Conquer fan, but I'm at least excited that this is happening, though.
Just for the record, for those who might be kind of listening to this episode but who may not have heard about it, the specific game that's being remastered is Command and Conquer and Red Alert. And I guess I should probably ask you, like, you said that this is like a very weird move for EA. What do you think kind of prompted it to happen in the first place?
From what I've read on Reddit, it was mostly it mostly came down to a single person within EA. His name is Jim Fasella, if I recall correctly, who was really passionate about the franchise. He had worked within EA LA before it was shut down or rebranded to DICE Los Angeles. Right. And he kind of pushed for this to happen, and EA. And with EA, he reached out to Petroglyph, who were I don't know if it's correct, but there a bunch of them are ex-Westwood employees, so or a small handful of them at least, and with that team, they're just kind of remastering this franchise. But yeah, again, I don't really know why or what their end goal is with this.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to imagine that it probably fits into EA's profit margins in the way that something like that that like indie yarn game, for example, or other kind of like similar games, those like kind of indie light games that EA has kind of managed to make part of their portfolio over the past few years. It's probably not something that's like consuming a lot of resources, and so I'd imagine that the higher ups are probably like, yeah, sure, kind of go ahead with it.
Yeah. Perhaps it's just trying to raise brand awareness, trying to keep Command and Conquer, the brand alive for when a day comes that RTS is in vogue again, and that that they kind of want to have that brand ready to go and launch like a proper new sequel for it. Yeah, that could be a possibility.
So we're kind of we're basically 2/3 of the way through the kind of questions. I know it sounds like I asked you 100 questions, but I'm keeping track, and I've actually asked you about 7 questions.
Okay.
So we're getting towards the end here, but I still have some hard hitters. First one, this is a little bit of a weird tangent, but stick with me. The thing about the Command and Conquer series is that not every game in the Command and Conquer series has been an RTS. There have been some, attempts / experiments in other genres. What are kind of your opinions on those? And in fact, do you have much of an experience with them at all?
So I have played Command and Conquer Renegade, which is the game I think you're referring to, the first person.
Right.
Yeah.
The reason why I said like multiple experiences is because there were also some like canceled like projects and whatnot that were covered in some of our previous videos as well.
Oh yeah, for sure. So my thoughts on them are basically very neutral. I do think that the Command and Conquer or some of the Command and Conquer universes lend themselves very well to experience that are not RTS. So there's this canceled first-person shooter, I believe, which was set in the Generals universe, which was basically the same kind of game as Homefront ended up being, a game in which you were like the last resistance within America as the Chinese invaded, I believe.
Yeah, or South Korea. North Korea. I don't remember.
Yeah, something like that. And well, I do think it's an interesting concept. I do think that if they're going to be riding on that Command and Conquer brand, it would be cool to see at least like a mixture of RTS elements. And I think that the Tiberium game, which was a first-person shooter / RTS game that never ended up seeing the light, was a very interesting experiment, and I would have loved to see that coming out. In the end, I don't really think that every game that's released in the Command and Conquer universe should be a RTS game. I do like to see a sort of variety, but it's always a bit iffy though. You have to nail a lot of elements to please Command and Conquer fans in that way.
Right. And the thing is, right now with the series, on sort of semi life support, you kind of want to put your best foot out forward, and that best foot out forward is doing something traditional and that people know and love, as opposed to something a little bit weirder.
Yeah, for sure. You couldn't release a game like Tiberium today as being like the return to the Command and Conquer franchise. You have to like release a proper real-time strategy, kind of what the remake is going to be if it ends up being all that it's promised to be.
Yeah, in the future we might do an episode on the Metroid series, for example, and that series had this kind of weird moment a couple of years ago where after a kind of 6-year-long absence without any new games in that series, they put out this game called Metroid Prime Federation Force on the 3DS, which was like instead of being like a Metroidvania style of game, it was more of this weird cooperative experience with a very kind of cutesy art style, and people were really kind of turned off from it. Like when your franchise goes for a very long time without much of an update, when it comes back, you kind of gotta give people comfort food.
Yeah, for sure, I agree. And I can see the same thing happening to Command and Conquer if EA ever decides to pull a similar to move to what Metroid did back then.
Yeah. So I feel like we got a pretty earlier. We mentioned that you personally are quite fond of the Generals branch of the series, which by extension probably means that your favorite game in the series is Command and Conquer Generals because there is only one game in that branch.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's Generals. Yeah.
Yeah. Of the other two branches, though, what are your favorite?
So for Red Alert, it's the first Red Alert. I think that game. So if you're not really familiar with the Red Alert sub-series, the first Red Alert was a bit grounded. It was still wacky and zany and had all these time-altering elements, but it was still relatively grounded with realistic units and stuff. I feel like the Red Alert 2 was really good, but it kind of went overboard with the wackiness and the zaniness of the themes for my part. And then Red Alert 3 was just totally ridiculous. and that was just too far gone for me. With regards to the Tiberium universe, and I don't know that what I'm going to say is a bit controversial. It actually is Tiberium Wars, the third official entry in the series. I feel that game had a very fun gameplay loop with really interesting unit design, and I really liked the single player campaign with the A-list actors and cast that they managed to get for that game. So yeah, Tiberium Wars is definitely the game in the Tiberium universe that is my favorite. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I mean, I'm not going to render any judgment, obviously, because I'm not super familiar with these games myself. But hey, you're on this podcast. You're always welcome to say kind of whatever you want to speak, whatever you want to feel.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
And so, kind of to round things out, if anybody is listening to this podcast and they're like, "Oh, this sounds really interesting. I want to get into the Command and Conquer series." How do you recommend that they go about doing so?
Oh, that's a difficult one. That's probably like the most difficult question you've asked all night. Because the thing is, Command and Conquer is so big. Like, there's so many games right now, and there's so many. They vary a lot in what they kind of offer. So I'd say, yeah, if you're more into like contemporary warfare, Generals might be the way to go. If you want to get your hands on something more true to what Command and Conquer really offers, I'd say Tiberium Wars is a good way to kind of get into the franchise without going way back into the history books. Yeah, if you just want to start at the beginning, just go with Command and Conquer 1 because it really holds up. The gameplay is still fun, and yeah, I very much like it. So those are kind of three options you have to get into the series.
Okay. If somebody listening to this is like a lot more console centric as opposed to PC centric, and they have allergic reactions whenever they put their hands on a keyboard, would you possibly recommend some of Command and Conquer's more successful console games? Like, I know you mentioned earlier that you weren't a huge fan of Command and Conquer Red Alert 3 because that game, took the ludicrousness of the series a little bit too far. But I know that game, released on the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 and while it wasn't as well received as its PC release, those ports of the game were decently received all the same. Would you recommend that as a possible entry point, or would you adamantly stand by the PC games?
For sure, I would definitely recommend at least try a PC version of Command and Conquer. But if it's not really your thing, I've played the demo of Tiberium Wars on the Xbox 360 when it released back in the day, and I cannot really say anything super negative about it. The way they handled the console controller was actually really fun and inventive. It's not as fast and snappy as mouse and keyboard, of course, but if that's your only way to go and you do really want to get into the Command and Conquer franchise that way, sure, go for it. Definitely.
All right, cool. And with that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you very much, Ailert. I hope that wasn't too stressful on you being interviewed with all those questions.
Yeah, no problem. It was really fun, actually. And I hope for the next episode you're ready for my list of questions.
Ooh, that is a tease. But what is he going to be interviewing me about? Well, you'll have to wait a bit to find out, because this is where we're going to be closing out this episode. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you want to support us, you can do so by watching our videos on this channel or on our primary channel at youtube.com/gamers, GVMERS. You can follow myself on Twitter at Alex Kozina. You can follow Ailert on Twitter at the Ailert, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
That is correct. And you can also support us on Patreon at patreon.com/gamers. Also correct?
Also correct.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't like, I don't know, underscore gamers or the gamers or...
No, it's all uniform, yeah.
All right. Until next time, this is Alexander Kazina, signing off. You want to do a sign off?
Yeah, my name's Ailert. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you in the next episode.
All right. See ya.
See ya.